Okay, perfect. Recording has started. So, hello everybody. Um, so today's session, I'm going to spend some time going through the assignment two. I just want to upload the pay survey quickly so you guys have full viewing of it. Um, and if you have your assignment out, I think best for you to start making notes so you have an understanding of where everything sort of belongs, all right? Um, so we're going to try and do as much as we possibly can. I at least want to close off the pacer and going through the assignment. Whatever time we have thereafter, we're going to go into our learning unit 6, which is the final learning unit of the semester, and it's on inventory. So there is quite a bit that we have to cover. So I'm going to try and do as much as I possibly can. If we don't finish it, the balance of it is going to go into a recording for next week. And then our live session thereafter will then be um, an exam prep session. So we try and get through as much as we possibly can, all right? So let's start. Which the good thing is your assignment's only going up to learning unit 4, which is everything that we've covered already. So I'm not going to stress too much about learning unit 6 because I can even do like half today and then the other half in our next session. I like to do these live recordings as opposed to just doing a pre-recorded session and putting it up. Okay, so let's start. So firstly, I'll say it again, referencing, absolutely important. Please make sure that you reference both in text and end of document referencing. I look for all of that. Your Turnitin percentage is very important. I was very lenient in the first assignment. So let's try and keep it at a decent level so that you can, like, for instance, your cover pages, etc. A lot of times those get pulled through as um, plagiarism. So I don't worry about that. I go into a detailed report on Turnitin and I check where there's highlighted topics that is sort of word for word paraphrased. And that's what I look at when we're looking at plagiarism. So make sure referencing is in order, in text and in text. Number two, submission on time, please. It's very, very important to make sure that you submit before 23:59. And I think the date is on the 16th of October. Make sure that it's submitted on time. Thirdly, um, please make sure that you submitting it in a PDF format. Word document does take, sometimes the system recognizes it and sometimes it doesn't. So please make sure that you are putting it in a PDF format. It's very, very important. Um, Fourthly, make sure that you have a good format of your assignment. So a cover page, a contents page. I did share an assignment template at the beginning of the semester, so please make sure you're using that assignment template and filling it in for as much as possible. There was students that, as a copy and paste sort of job, they would the pages that basically fall after your cover page, there was no changes in those pages. So make sure you proofread your assignment. This is a professional document that you are submitting as an assignment, so please proofread. I made comments on a few assignments where I said, guys, you need to make sure that you proofread it because the information that I'm seeing here, you can clearly see it's a copy and a paste job, or it was just basically not changed at all. Okay, so let's start, right? So firstly, the first case study specifically is around a company called Bright Tech Electronics. Please make sure you are doing the correct assignment, right? So the case study there is Bright Tech Electronics. You're going to go over the case study specifically. And then we're going to go to, oh wait, something happened. Just give me 1 second. Assignment just disappeared. Apologies. Okay, so we're going into Bright Tech Electronics. industries, consumer electronics. They give you a location in Johannesburg. I'm obviously not going to run or read through this entire case study, but it shares what the background of the business is, some of the problems that they are facing, and um, the consequences. So it's a two-page case study, if I'm not mistaken. So the first one is information sourcing inventory, are key concepts in the supply chain for Brightech. Explain how information sourcing and inventory would function in supply chain drivers for Brightech specifically. Okay, so I want you to re-look at this memorandum, this learning unit as learning unit one, and it sits in theme one to theme three, and you're looking for your supply chain drivers and it's sharing what the supply chain drivers are: information, inventory, as well as sourcing. Um, and basically, how the rubric is going to work is you're going to be allocated 5 marks per driver. So you need to basically make sure that it exceeds the sort of standard that is required, meaning that whatever theory you're explaining on the three drivers, you have an example or you're linking it to a scenario in the case study. Um, however way that link is, you're not just saying what information is, you are linking information to Bright Tech and the problem statement or the case study that has been provided in the assignment. Um, and it does say there in the assignment, your tip is to explain each driver in the context of Brightech. So for 15 marks, you allocated 5 marks per driver. Okay. Then we got question 1.2, which is Brightech is launching a plan to improve its processes and restore its brand reputation, considering logistics as a key element. So here they're asking you to explain the concepts of logistics within the context of Brightech supply chain management. So in this specific one, you are looking at Learning Unit 1, Theme 1, which is sitting in Chapter 1, and it is for 5 marks. So you need to explain in the context of supply chain how logistics basically operates or works, and now link that to an example within the case study for Brightech, just to go extra marks. I mean, if you're just going to do just a pure definition, you're probably going to end up with 1 out of 5. If you're going in a little bit further, but your link is not fully integrated, you're probably looking at about 3 marks, and you're going to get full marks when you have the full integration of that particular link. Okay, then we're going to go into question 2.1. Brightech has been contemplating international purchasing to help mitigate the quality issues that they are experiencing, conduct additional research, and discuss 2 key risks that Brightech might experience if they go ahead with the cost of action. So, whenever the assignment question says conduct additional research, it's basically telling you to go beyond the textbook, right? Meaning that you want to be looking at quite possibly, you know, 2 points, I would say 2 to 3 points for 10 marks, where you're explaining, let's say it's 2 points, so you're explaining 5 marks each, exactly what the question is asking you. Is it probably they're deciding to go international because of quality, maybe, or maybe it's inventory, whatever the case is, whatever that answer is, you now need to link it to the particular case study in hand, right? And that is then sitting in Learning Unit 2, Theme 3, which is in Chapter 4. Then we're going to go into 2.2. South Africa has legislation and frameworks in place to support the procurement industry. Discuss the legislative framework of local production and content and how it relates to Brighter. So in this question, it's actually telling you for 10 marks that you have 6 marks allocated to a theoretical discussion and then 4 marks to an application discussion. Right, and then this particular source of information is sitting in Learning Unit 3, Theme 1, and that's sitting in Chapter 5. And in this case, you need to fully explain sort of the description of what that theory is, in order for you to get the full 6 marks, and then how you're going to now apply it. So whether you're speaking about like the Department of Trade and Industry from a South African perspective, so Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, so it's DTIC, um, whether it's National Treasury, so it's it's asking you to speak on, from a trade and industry and a local content and production perspective in South Africa. Excuse me. So it's always nice to go and do additional research when it comes to more of a South African legislation perspective, so that you can explain better and also relate it then to Brightech, which is the case study that we've been talking about. Okay. The next one is question 2.3. A state-owned, not-for-profit company, Health Together, wants to buy small home appliances from Brightech. One of the pillars of procurement that exists in South Africa is open and effective competition, right? In fact, discuss this pillar and how it affects Help Together and Brightech. And it gives you a rubric for theory 6 marks and for application 4 marks. And this is coming out of Learning Unit 3, Theme 2, also Chapter 5. So in this specific question, you want to dig deeper into something that's more from an competition, open and effective competition. So, speaking on the 6 marks specifically, it's what is your knowledge and how you're describing what open and effective competition is going to be. You want your key points from a theory perspective to be explained fully, identified. You need to describe it in the best possible way that you can. And when we're looking at it from an application perspective, the theory that you're now explaining and the situation or the scenario that you're pulling out from the case study, it needs to be very well sort of integrated. There needs to be good examples that's being used. Um, you need to basically understand the case study so you can bring it into the scenario specifically. So when you're speaking about open and effective competition, you want to talk about how the different competitive processes, the different policies, the procedures, etc., is more so developed, and how you're going to achieve the objective that it sets about. You can bring in sort of legislation if need be from a government perspective in South Africa. You can use different supply chain management systems, explain it how when you acquire, you know, goods and services, how it relates to state and government, how you dispose of it when you don't require it anymore. So you can go into as much detail as possible um, when you're explaining that specific topic. All right. Then we got question 3, okay, which is quality management. So quality management seems to be an issue that is hindering the success of Brightech. Conduct your research beyond your prescribed textbook, which basically tells you your textbook's not going to be good enough. You need to go and do external research from external sources. Explain what quality is in the context of Brightech. So if you're taking a direct quotation from the textbook, it's not going to work out, and you need to have a reference from a credible source other than your prescribed textbook. So it's always beneficiary to you to go out into an external source to quote this. I mean, it is for 5 marks from a 3.1 perspective. Quality is sitting in Learning Unit 4 in Theme 1. But if you have to explain it 100%, you want to be able to understand that what the theoretical concept is, how it's related to quality from a Brightech perspective. You, as much as they ask you more from a theoretical perspective, always bring in external factors. Whether you are using the source from or a example from Brightech, bring that in. If you're using an example from an external service, example, bring that in, because it just shows me and a moderator how your thinking is when it comes to quality. So you want to talk about how quality is, it assists when you're satisfying the needs of the customer, their requirements, etc. You need the right level of quality to provide to your customer. You want to be able to make sure that you're doing it right the first time. Um, communication needs to be at the forefront. At the end of the day, your customer is considered to be king. Um, so your quality needs to be of, uh, the ultimate goal is to make sure that you have quality in your product so that the customer keeps coming back. So I obviously gave you layman's terms and kitchen talk, but you need to officiate all of those concepts at the end of the day. Okay, then we're going to go into question 3.2. Explain three principles that Brightech would need to ensure they design a meaningful quality assurance process. Provide an example related to Brightech of each principle. So this is for 15 marks. 9 marks is theory and 6 marks is your application. And you can find this information in Learning Unit 4 in Theme 2, also in Chapter 6. And with this question specifically for your um, 9 marks, I would say more or less you want to get at least three principles, um, where you're allocating 3 marks per principle, and then you're allocating 2 marks per principle for an example or for an application where you are integrating it to the theory. Whatever your example is going to be, then make sure at minimum you've got 3 principles that you are now explaining. I'm not obviously going to go through what I think the principles are because I'll be answering the question for you, but it's more or less giving you an idea of how much you should be writing out. Okay. Then we have question 4, which is sort of your essay question. And it says, in a report, clearly explain what total quality management system is and why would it be beneficial for Brightech to implement such a system. So remember, essay questions carry a lot of weighting. It's total of 30 marks here. So make sure that you are answering this to the best of your ability. It is very easy to score good marks in an essay question, but you have to make sure that you're ticking all of the boxes. So the first one is from a rubric perspective. It's number one is the structure of your essay and your clarity of your writing for 3 marks. Are you putting your essay in the correct format? Meaning, is there an introduction? Is there a body? Is there a conclusion? It's very easy to do that. I also look at, from a sentence construction, spelling errors, all of that. And that's how I sort of deduce the marks that I would allocate. Then the second part of it is where your body is basically going to sit, where it's content. So with the content, you want to firstly do explanation of what TQM is and the relevance that it has to the company Brightech. What is the main characteristics of TQM and how it would apply to Brightech for 10 marks, and then your drivers of TQM for 5 marks, and your benefit to Brightech should they have TQM in their business, and that's for 5 marks. So in total, the body specifically is an allocation of 25 marks, where you can score really well here if you just make sure that you tick all of those relevant boxes. So that TQM portion is also sitting in Learning Unit 4, so make sure that you check that out. Um, and basically, what you want to do firstly is explain what TQM is in relation to, firstly, theory for, I mean, a total of what, 5 marks. Maybe you're going to do a good 2-3 mark for theory and maybe a 2 mark for 2-3 mark for your explanation in relation to Brightech. You're going to go into the different characteristics. So I would say in total, you probably allocate 1 mark for a characteristic, 1 mark for an application. So in total, probably about 5 characteristics with 5 applications for a total of 10 marks. And then your drivers, which will be 5 marks. Remember the drivers. We spoke about this in one of our live lectures, and we had gone through Toyota, for instance. They one of the biggest when it comes to total quality management. Make sure that when you are explaining it, use key concepts, right? Stuff that is supply chain related concepts, because that's where you're going to score your marks, and explain what those supply chain management concepts are, which is actually part of your drivers, and make sure that you are applying these to Brightic. And then 5 marks will be for your benefits of TQM, right? Which is theoretical. Um, and the last one for 2 marks will be your structure or your argument, basically, which is your comprehensiveness of your answer. Is your answer making sense to me? Do I have to search for the information? Is everything not integrated well enough? If it's not, then you score lower in the last portion, which is the 2 mark portion. Um, but if everything just flows and the answer sets really well, then you will end up scoring, quite nicely when it comes to um, the comprehensiveness of your answer. Okay, is there any questions so far before I move on to the actual lecture?
Hello,
I
just
take
how
it.
many pages or how long, sorry, would the essay? I always ask this question. I just want to know how many pages are you looking at?
Uh, Okay, well, honestly, as long as you're answering your question well, I would say maybe give or take about 2.5 to 3 pages. It's very easy for me to say 2.5 to 3 pages, but I mean it can be more than that. But as long as the content of it is sitting well, so if you're
Okay,
following 5 benefits, for instance, or 5 different characteristics with 5 application. I mean, you can answer that in just for the 10-mark question, you can probably do it in like 3/4 of a page. Um, so it all depends on you and what how your typing is going to be and whether you are explaining too much. But as long as you're covering the points, but I would say maybe between 2.5 to 3 pages
thank you.
realistically. Okay, no problem. Any other questions? Okay, I think, I mean, it's quite a standard. It's actually a really good assignment where you can score really good marks because it's very simple. I felt like assignment one was more challenging than this assignment. Um, the reason also is that you're only working off one case study, which helps because by the time you get to question two, you already understand this case study so well, you'll be able to apply it very thoroughly to your theory. So I do think you're probably in a good space when it comes to this assignment. You can score it really well. But also, I'll say it again, I'm here as support. I'm not here to come and, lecture until I'm blue in the face. So call me or WhatsApp me or email me um, if you have any questions prior to doing the assignment, and I'm happy to help. Okay. So then let's now go through to our learning unit. So I'm not going to rush through it, okay, because we obviously have some time and we're now currently on the last learning unit. So it doesn't make sense for me to rush into it at all. Um, I want to at least use the last session that we have to go over some key points and maybe some theory or content that I feel is going to be important that I need to now revisit or re explain. Or better yet, you coming with maybe just like a few days before telling me that I don't understand this. Can you please explain it to me in the class? And I'll be happy to do that. Okay. All right. So today's learning unit is on learning unit 6, and I've basically put all themes together because it just didn't make sense to separate it, especially when we're speaking inventory for a lot of it. What I will do though is may not be able to finish everything today. Well, probably not. So I will keep some for our next session, our next live session, and we'll probably use half of that session for this, and we'll do revision for the other half. Okay. So the first thing is obviously we want to speak about inventory specifically, which is actually a really nice topic. So when we're talking about inventory, we want to understand where we're sitting in terms of overseeing, controlling, ordering, storing, and using a company inventory. Um, and we're looking at various options like stock controls. Um, how do we how do we manage the stock in our facility from a warehouse perspective? I know there's a lot of automation nowadays. There's a lot of warehouse management system which can allow for better stock control, and with that we have automatic updates when stock is removed off a shelf or raw material is taken into production. So there's a lot of different ways that we can make sure that we get this going. Then we have order management, which is uh, especially when a customer has to place an order, because of the way it runs through the supply chain specifically, we're able to control whether we do have stock or we don't have stock. If your supply chain is run in a very functional way and it's also very controlled and a bit of automation, you'll be able to have a very streamlined order management so that you can control as much inventory as possible, and you're not left with a stock out or a having to go into buffer stock or safety stock. You are able to fully run your business. It will be fully functional with the amount of orders, even if your demand does increase. Then demand forecasting, and I think we did go through a lot of demand forecasting, at the beginning of the semester, where a lot of businesses look at different seasonalities, they look at different times in their business and how best they can better forecast for their specific business. Um, whether it is they're selling winter jackets, they're forecasting what their demand is going to be this winter based on the fact that it's colder than it was the previous year. So there's a lot of different elements that go into how you're going to forecast your demand. A lot of businesses go with the volume that they did last year at the same time period, plus a 10, 20, or 15% increase. Tracking and analysis. So with the help of automation, especially in warehouses specifically, it allows for a lot of tracking in terms of knowing where your stock is. So, for instance, if you have let's call it a textile business, all right? You have different elements or different SKUs, as we call it, that is now put into various pallet positions in the business. So, you can see here in this little picture that I have. This is, let me just make it slightly bigger. So this is what we call pallet spaces. Um, uh, box spaces on pallets, all right? So each box, for instance, or each line you can see there, you have a different SKU. So for instance, if you are doing textile and you're doing, let's say, black t-shirts, you're now going to have a small, a medium, a large, an XL, double XL. If you're doing a white t-shirt, exactly. So each shelf is going to carry a different SKU, and you now need to track that SKU every time there's an order that goes out. It allows for better picking. It allows for better packing. If you're assembling an order, it allows for just a little bit more um, accuracy within your business and accuracy when it comes to order management also. From an analysis perspective, you want to look at it from a data control side. So bringing in all of the data that is, whether it's a inbound report or a items on stock or in stock or an outbound report, using all of the data so you can better analyze, from an ERP system or a warehouse management system perspective. You're able to know how much of stock you have on hand and how much you need to now either order or manufacture. And then warehousing and storage is sort of self-explanatory in terms of how much of stock you're being held in a specific location. Whether it's something that's more urban or something that is more regional, whatever that storage space is that you're requesting, it's where you're going to be holding stock. Majority of the time, the storage portion of it is where finished goods are held, whereas the warehousing can be also majority of finished goods, but there's an element of raw material that can also go in there depending on what your business is. Okay, then we have the different row of inventory. So obviously the first role of inventory, which is probably the most obvious one, is that you need to be able to make sure that your customer is satisfied immediately. So, making sure that you have stock that is available so that when your customer places an order, you can deliver on that order. So, the end goal is to respond to anything that is predictable within your supply chain. So, if your business, for instance, arranges for, let's say, sufficient capacity so that you can meet or match that demand, then you need to produce an amount to match that demand. Then your supply chain carries very little inventory. And if your demand, for instance, it may come from an external customer or it's coming from, from an operation side, um, you need to reduce the amount of inventory you're carrying purely because your cash then sits in inventory, right? So there's a lot of carrying cost that is now sitting in the inventory that you hold. So the role of inventory specifically is you want to be able to balance your supply and balance your demand. So you want to create that immediate satisfaction to your customer's demand, um, especially in periods when you're not producing a particular item. So it allows for the business itself to deal with any sort of seasonality in either a supply side or a demand side. So carrying enough stock, especially when you have a production schedule, your schedule, if you're carrying, for instance, various different SKUs from a manufacturing perspective, the way your schedule would work is there's a possibility that you're not manufacturing SKU 1 and 2 on a daily basis. It's probably done once a week. So you need to make sure that SKU 1 and 2, you're carrying sufficient stock of it so you're balancing your supply and demand because you don't have production on a on a constant basis. Okay. Then it's facilitating your production flow. So you want to support production as much as possible. So by doing this, you want to basically reduce the risk of anything from a supplier uncertainty or if your supplier has gone wrong. So your buffer stock or your safety stock is used so that you can protect yourself in your business against anything. Like, let's say, for instance, your supplier supplies you with items and a truck breaks down, but you need to obviously satisfy your customer's demand at the end of the day. So you try and use your buffer stock or your safety stock until that vehicle can be repaired or stock is transferred onto a new vehicle and then delivered to you. There's many elements like, for instance, if you are in like the agricultural sector, there may be a case where there's a lot of flooding or maybe there's droughts, and it can stop a lot of your production process because you're waiting for the raw material or those elements or components to arrive for you to continue the manufacturing process. So buffer stock or safety stock is very important in that um, perspective. Um, you want to just make sure that you have continuous production in your business, um, because when you're out of stock, it can really cause for a big situation with your customer. It does put a terrible taste in your customer's mouth when they order a specific item, and unfortunately, you tell them that you're out of stock of it. Okay, the third one is enabling flexibility in your um, specific order fulfillment. So in this case here, you want to make sure that you have as much flexibility in terms of how much you can produce and how much of that stock you can then sell out. Having the flexibility in terms of your supplier support or your production process does allow for you to be able to satisfy your customers' demand at the end of the day in a much better space. Um, and you want to prevent as much shortages as possible, so that you don't end up with poor customer service, etc. Then you want to go into a reduction in cost, and you want to bring in as much efficiency into the business as you possibly can. um, and by doing this, you want to make sure that you're not carrying too much of stock. You're carrying just the right amount of buffer stock, so that you don't have a lot of cost that's now sitting in your inventory, and making sure that your supply chain runs in a as a well-oiled machine is something that's very beneficial to the business at the end of the day, which increases your efficiency. Managing the risk and your uncertainty. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses, they don't you don't have full control over the risk of your business. So there is going to be cases where um, there's a small percentage of risk that you would have to carry, especially in a inventory or a warehousing sort of scenario or landscape. But you try and manage it by making sure that you have a good equilibrium when it comes to your supply and your demand. So whether it's managing a good production schedule or managing your suppliers so you get your raw materials on time, managing your production process, getting it out to deliver, and then managing your sort of supplies in terms of transportation from a delivery perspective. Then you want to look at supporting anything from a seasonal demand perspective. Whether it is basically making sure that you have continuous operations or continuous improvement in your business. If you know that there's a seasonal demand that's coming up, like I made mention of, your winter may be different this year compared to last year, whether it's Easter, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Valentine's Day, whatever your product then um, equates to that sort of seasonality, you are being quite supported by the inventory that you are now being carrying. And then the last one is improving your customer satisfaction. And I think this is very self-explanatory in terms of if all of your functions are now checked, from your full supply chain. So whether it's the material that you're getting in, what's being produced, what's going out, and it's ticking the box in terms of your customer's demand according to what their order is. Automatically, you then have customer satisfaction. Your customer keeps coming back for more, and um, it becomes a much better space for them to want to come back, and you will have a lot more business continuity from that perspective. All right. Then we're going to move on to the classification of inventory. And I think this you kind of know it because I think we've gone through it a little bit more. So when we look at inventory specifically, it can be classified in different terms in based on where they are in the supply chain, right? So the supply chain is very long-winded, depending on what business you're in or what environment you're at in terms of industry. So the more that it moves sort of downstream from your factory or your supplier all the way down to your final customer, the higher the value of your inventory then becomes because obviously you're adding more components to it, you're adding more cost to it from a labor or a machinery perspective, whatever your variable cost may be, you're adding more, which means that the value of your inventory is now getting higher. So this specific increase in value results from anything from a utility perspective that's attached. So, for instance, let's use an example of iron ore, right? So, the value of iron ore is much lower than the value of those metal sheets that you get from the iron ore. Um, Similarly, the value of those metal sheets used to manufacture car parts or body parts for your car is lower than the value of the body parts itself. So, as you go through the supply chain, the value of that item then just increases and increases and increases. Okay. Um, so the first one that we're going to look at is raw material. And raw material is um, any item that you buy from your supplier that's used in your specific production process, whether it's manufacturing product X, and it's in a very unprocessed state. So you want to be able to convert this product into something that's more of a semi-finished good or a finished good. So some examples of raw materials is like steel, timber, maybe textile or cloth or different types of material. So your raw material specifically is the most basic type of material that you have, and that businesses need in making their final product. So the inventory, when you're looking at it from a raw material side, is basically required to manufacture other components or your final product, and it is lower in value, as I mentioned in the beginning, but it's higher in volume because you obviously need a lot more of the raw material to produce, one element or one item of a specific product. Um, the next one that we're going to look at is work in progress. And when we look at work in progress, we're looking at these are like semi-finished goods or semi-finished products that you have in different stages in your production process. So when you have a more complex sort of production process, the investment that you put in is a lot larger in when you're processing that specific inventory. So when you're looking at inventory of work in progress, it's basically held so that you can support the manufacturing process as much as possible. So it may be a difference or it may be between a semi-finished good between different stages, or it may be a component that's used in a different manufacturing process. So work in progress can be either or, basically a component, or it can be a semi-finished good that is now used for a finished item. So when we're looking at work in progress from an inventory perspective, it's often held between different manufacturing stages within your business. So you want to avoid as much shutdown as possible, and you sort of have more of a continuous workflow that then happens within your manufacturing process. So not all businesses have sort of like a work in progress inventory perspective because um, you want to do as much, maximizing as possible. You want to produce in different economies of scale. So having a component that fits into a component sometimes can be difficult, especially when you're doing mass production. All right. Then we have packaging, okay, which is a lot of times sort of features very similarly to the way that work in progress does. It does form part of the manufacturing process, but there's different types of packaging that can be used in different stages in your process, whether it's items that is put into a box or a canister that's then put into a final box in your manufacturing process, whatever that case may be. But there's different packaging elements that can be used during your manufacturing process and at the end of your process when you're looking at it from a finished goods side. Okay. Then we have the last one, which is the last classification of inventory, which is finished good. So when we're looking at finished goods, it's basically a finished product or a completed product that is ready for sale to your customer. And it basically is what we use when we're looking at customer services, measuring your customer satisfaction level. You want to basically make sure that you reduce the likelihood of a stock out, because you need to make sure that you have good demand forecasting in hand and a good production process or schedule that speaks to that demand forecast. Um, your final product that you or your finished product that you manufacture can be held in um, a lot of different locations throughout your supply chain. Can be at a finished good warehouse that you have. It can be at a central distribution warehouse, maybe from a retailing perspective. It can be in a field warehouse. It can sit in a retailer itself. Whatever your item is, it can sit anywhere within the supply chain when we're looking at it from a finished goods perspective. So, the purpose of your finished good is to make sure that your entire business now sits together in terms of production or sales. So there is no more production after your finished good, and your sale can just happen. And your value of your finished good specifically is much higher than your raw material, than your work in progress, and then your packaging. So when we're looking at it from that perspective, this is your four main classification of inventory specifically. All right. I think let's make this our last slide, right? And then the balance of it we'll do in our next session. So the next one is classification um, uh, of your inventory based on the purpose. It's basically meant to give us an idea of your inventory and the classification in terms of the purpose that these products basically serve. So just to go over it, the first one is your cycle stock. So cycle stock is basically your inventory that comes from your replenishment process. Um, in order for you to meet your demand under, whether it's, different seasonality or different conditions, that's that's where your business can therefore predict your demand and replenishment then happens. So for instance, if you have 5 items in stock, you forecasted your demand as 4, you now need to now then refill it by 1 in order for you to have, 5 items then being sold as per your order. So your from a distribution perspective, your cycle stock is basically the inventory that is required to meet the stock that you have now gotten from a demand perspective. And it can also be called something as a base stock. Right. So your cycle stock is your movement of your stock so that you keep your replenishment running at all times. Right. Transit stock. So transit stock is inventory that is en route from one location to another location. Um, it may be the place of manufacturing, or where your shipment basically originated, right down to maybe a warehouse or a centralized warehousing counterpart, uh, but basically it's either moving or it's a waiting movement from one site to another site. Okay. It can also be part of your cycle stock that is used for replenishment, but because it's now in transit, we still call it transit stock because it hasn't been received into a warehouse or received into or GRV'd into your stock count of inventory that you have at your facility. Okay, so when we're looking at depending on the terms of the sale, a lot of times your transit inventory is owned by either the supplier or it's owned by the receiver, and then you can understand where the cost of it is in your supply chain. Then we have safety or buffer stock. Okay, it's what I've been speaking about earlier. So safety or buffer stock is basically stock that is held in excess of your cycle stock. Right. So if you have 5 in your replenishment or your cycle stock, you got another 5 sitting in buffer or safety stock. Because there's so much of uncertainty in your demand, uncertainty in your lead time, you want to always be having safety or buffer stock on hand. The level of safety stock that you also want to have on hand is mainly dependent on how much of uncertainty that you see in the market, um, whether there's a variation in your sale, um, then maybe more safety stock is then required. Let's say, for instance, your biggest competitor had now shut his doors, then obviously your demand is just going to skyrocket. Therefore, you want to have more safety stock. So you sort of need to understand what the variability is in terms of the market in order for you to understand how much of safety stock to have. Okay. And then the last one is speculative stock. So speculative stock is basically stock or inventory that is held for reasons other than a normal day-to-day running based on orders, etc. Um, basically, a lot of times businesses may have purchase different inventory or different stock in larger volumes because they qualify for, let's say, discounts because of economies of scale, or maybe when the price is good, is better than what they've expected, so they purchase more. Or if you are kind of expecting a little bit of a shortage of goods, then maybe you'll purchase a little bit more. Or there's some part of a marketing campaign that you're running in your business and you need more than normal stock because you're running a complete sale of the item or you're giving items for free, or if you're having any sort of seasonal sales. So that is what speculative stock is. So four classifications of stock and the purpose. cycle, transit, safety, speculator, stock. So that is obviously the four most important ones that I need you to remember. So far, inventory is not so bad. We're going to go into a little bit of warehousing, types of warehousing, the different advantages, between private, public warehousing, etc. Um, uh, Both advantages and disadvantages, and different sort of participants when it comes to transportation. Who the shipper is, who the consignee is. So we're going more into the logistics space towards the end of this learning unit. But yeah, I think so far so good. We've covered quite a bit today. We've got a few more slides to go, which we'll complete in our next session. And then just reminders, obviously go through this recording. If you get stuck with the assignment, or contact me for anything. Make sure that you reference your assignment. Make sure you're submitting it on time. Make sure you're using the assignment template. um, ICE tasks all for due on the 6th of October, which is next week, Monday. After the 6th of October, I will not be accepting anymore. I will not even grade your ICE task, but please make sure that you just have all of those uploaded and now ready for me by the 6th of October. Your results will be released basically in that week for all your ICE tasks. Is there any questions? Okay, I think we're all good. So thank you guys. All the best with your assignment and your ICE tasks. And I hope everything goes well. Have a good evening. Goodbye.